Well, President-elect Donald Trump has been making nominations for his cabinet when he returns to the White House, and there's been a lot of controversy over them, Kamal. I think it's fair to say.
It certainly has, Gordon. I mean, he's certainly trying to fulfill his promise, which was, I'm going to overthrow the establishment. The establishment has let you down. It doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to create this huge change, we spoke last week, Gordon, about Elon Musk being brought in to try and drive efficiency in the federal state. And he's just started with this whole list of highly controversial people saying, I almost don't care that they're controversial. Their controversy is part of their offer.
Yeah, it's almost like their controversy is their strength, isn't it? So we're going to be talking in a moment about one of the most controversial, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. But among the other controversial appointments, Matt Gaetz is the guy that he has nominated for Attorney General. Now, his detractors have sort of put together a bit of a rap sheet of his career, his life. He's a former Florida congressman. He has been accused in the past of sexual misconduct. He underwent a federal sex trafficking probe that ended without charges against him, we should say, and a House Ethics Inquiry. And since 2021, the House Ethics Committee has investigated him over various allegations, including a claim that he had sex with an underage girl, used illicit drugs, accepted bribes, misused campaign funds, and shared inappropriate images on the House floor. I think Trump supporters would probably say that was politically motivated, wouldn't they? Now, he's denied all of these claims. He's pointed out that none of them came to anything, and we should remind ourselves that in America there is a tradition of people at least claiming that things like this can be politically motivated.
And after Matt Gaetz, President-elect Donald Trump has also nominated Pete Hegseth as the U.S. Defense Secretary. Now, he was investigated over a sexual assault allegation in 2017, although he wasn't arrested or charged, and he denies any wrongdoing. It has also been reported he was barred in 2021 from serving in support of Joe Biden's inauguration as a National Guard member after an intelligence officer posted concerns on social media. This was due to a tattoo on Pete Hegseth's bicep that's associated with white supremacist groups.
And he also has denied any wrongdoing. I think he's also an Army veteran, isn't he, Pete Hegseth? And then we've also got Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democratic representative, who has been nominated as Director of National Intelligence. She's drawn criticism for her views on Russia and other U.S. adversaries. She wrote on social media on the day Russia invaded Ukraine that the war could have been prevented if the U.S. and its Western allies had recognized Russia's, quote, legitimate security concerns about Ukraine's bid to join NATO. And then the following month, she said it was an undeniable fact that there were US-funded biolabs in Ukraine that could, quote, release and spread deadly pathogens, as she called for a ceasefire.
Well, certainly the most controversial of that list is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. President-elect Trump has nominated him as the new head of the US Department of Health and Human Services. He denies the value of vaccines. He's a public health conspiracy theorist. RFK is the chairman and founder of Children's Health Defense, which is an anti-vaccine advocacy group. And he's also a proponent of COVID-19 vaccine misinformation. Now, to talk about Donald Trump's nomination, we are joined by Paul Offit. He is director of the Vaccine Education Center and attending physician in the Division of Infectious Diseases at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Paul, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. Obviously, over here in the United Kingdom, we're seeing the announcements that Donald Trump is making about the team he wants around him as he approaches becoming the 47th president of the United States. One of those that has caused most controversy, or certainly a lot of controversy amongst a number of controversies over who he is appointing, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I just wonder, Paul, just for our audience that maybe won't be as familiar with Robert F. Kennedy as you are over in America, just tell us your response to that as a vaccine expert, that Robert F. Kennedy has been nominated for this key position.
Well, he's a virulent anti-vaccine activist. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's a science denialist. When asked the question on a recent podcast, is there any vaccine that you think is of value? He said no. The podcaster, surprised, said, well, how about the polio vaccine? And he said, no, that vaccine has killed more people than it saved. He continues to say that vaccines cause autism, even though dozens of studies have shown that it hasn't. And he's an AIDS denialist. He doesn't believe that human immunodeficiency virus is the cause of AIDS. This is not the kind of person you would choose to run agencies that are science-based.
What started all of this, Paul? Where's he coming from? When did he begin on this track?
Well, so I would say that in about 20 years ago, he wrote an article for Rolling Stone magazine called Deadly Immunity, where he claimed that this ethyl mercury containing preservative that was in vaccines but really isn't in vaccines anymore, at least not given to young children, that was causing a variety of disorders like attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, autism, etc., which was patently wrong. But that sort of launched his career in this because he worked for the Hudson River Keepers, where he was interested in things like contamination of the water with things like mercury. So that was a logical extension. And ever since then, he has pretty much gotten it wrong every bit of the way. It's amazing that one can be so wrong for so long. I just wish he would start picking sporting events so you would know who to bet against.
How is it possible for someone so controversial and, as you say, denying science to become someone, presumably, with so much power in a scientific sector?
Well, I think this is the Trump administration theme. I mean, it's not just him. It's somebody like Matt Gaetz as the head of the Department of Justice, who has said in the past that he thinks the Department of Justice should be eliminated. Has head of the Department of Energy. You have a climate change denier. You have a recent appointee or hoped appointee for the Department of Defense who has pretty much no experience in that kind of role. I think the goal here is to just overthrow the federal government as we know it from the inside out.
And how does that make you feel as a scientist working in the field? How much power does the health secretary have to overthrow science?
He has a lot of power. First of all, he's always had a platform because of his name. His name is famous in the United States and gives him a platform. I think now he has in some ways been more validated by the notion that he's even being considered to head the Department of Health and Human Service. That validates him even more. And I've gotten emails from pediatricians recently saying that they have had parents who have read his statements, which are now at a more national level than ever before, and are choosing not to vaccinate their children. I have no doubt that should he become Secretary of Health and Human Services, that erosion, there will be an erosion in vaccine rates, and there will be an increase in vaccine preventable diseases, and children will suffer. I have no doubt that's true.
Paul, you had a personal run-in with him, didn't you, some time ago? Can you just tell us a little bit about what happened?
Well, it was actually not a run-in. It was a conversation where he called me maybe 20 years ago and said, look, I've had parents coming into my office wondering whether this ethyl mercury containing preservative in vaccines could be harmful, because mercury certainly never sounds good. And at that time, there were about 5 studies that had already been published looking at children who got mercury containing vaccines, compared them to children who got the same vaccines that didn't contain this preservative, to show that there was no difference in outcomes. And so I went through those studies with him. I thought it was a great conversation. We talked for about an hour. I went home to my wife that night and said, this was great. You know, I'm going to be invited to the Kennedy compound. We're going to be throwing the football around. This is going to be great. And then, like a few months later, he published an article in Rolling Stone claiming that I'd lied to him, which became part of his stump speech. I became part of his stump speech. He would say, I talked to the CDC. I asked them, who can I talk to about this? They gave me this guy's name, Paul Offit. And then I realized that he was deeply in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry, and he lied to me. First of all, I'm not in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry. I am the co-inventor of a vaccine, which has pretty much eliminated hospitalizations from this particular virus in this country. It's actually a good thing, but this is the game he plays.
Beyond vaccines, in some other areas around food and health, the areas of fluoride in water. Are there some areas where he has got things to say which are worthy of note?
Sure. So he says that we can eat better. We can eat better foods. We can exercise more. We can diet more. And by doing that, we can decrease the incidence of type 2 diabetes. We can decrease the incidence of obesity and the consequences of those diseases like, heart attacks and strokes. Great, all for it. But this is not the guy you want to do that because he's a science denialist. Because when presented with science that shows he's wrong, he still never backs off. There are many people in this country who could do exactly what he's claiming he would like to do, who could do it much better because they're not science denialists. I mean, he's not the only guy who can do this. And so I don't see why it should be him. Also, fluoride is a public health achievement. We've dramatically decreased the incidence of cavities in our country. And it's just, Donald Trump, when he was elected, said he was going to drill. I think everybody thought he meant oil, but maybe he meant kids' teeth.
And then, of course, Donald Trump made him meet a McDonald's on the plane, didn't he? Which rather suggests that Trump maybe doesn't want him to go ahead with any reforms of, healthy foods.
Right. Well, that's right. Well, I assume it doesn't mean eliminating just the Big Macs and Cokes that he has pretty much every day. Right.
As a sort of leading health expert, is there anything that you can do or the scientific community can do or at state level can be done to protect vaccination rates? I mean, that's a pretty frightening prospect, Paul, that you put before us, that if this goes through and Robert F. Kennedy does become the health secretary, the actual vaccination rates for Americans will fall and the incidence of disease, preventable disease, will rise. Is there any way that you can fight back, so to speak?
Well, so the way academics usually fight back in this is they get other academics together, like from, the American Academy of Pediatrics or the National Academy of Medicine, et cetera, to write these sort of position papers saying how this is the wrong thing to do. It's like, 35 Nobel Prize winning economists have said, don't do this. But that doesn't work with this administration. It's a political problem. It has to have a political solution. So the meetings that we've been having now are to try and figure out who has access to politicians that could in any way influence this. I mean, I have to believe that the senators and members of the House of Representatives who see Robert F. Kennedy Jr., including on the Republican side, are scared about him. And so we just have to find a way politically to make sure he doesn't get confirmed. And we'll try our best, but it's a political problem and it has to have a political solution.
On the subject of whether he gets confirmed or not, there has been some talk recently that perhaps some of these slightly more outlandish appointments or nominations that Trump has suggested may be people who he expects to be rejected, and that really the guy that or the woman he does want to give the job to is the sort of next one down, and that these are all a bit of a sort of, this is all smoke and mirrors. Is there any truth in that, do you think? What do you make of that suggestion?
We'll find out. It was sort of like the Jurassic Park argument. The T-Rex keeps checking various parts of the fence to see what's electrified and what's not, and then when it's not electrified, he goes through. I don't know. I mean, this sort of I think that gives Trump too much credit. I really do think these are the people he wants, as outrageous as they are. And we'll see. I can't imagine Matt Gaetz actually gets confirmed. It's just too outlandish. And maybe that's the point. Have this incredibly outlandish person, and then you bring on other people who, while outlandish, are not that outlandish.
How do you think the debate in health has got to this point? I mean, Donald Trump, of course, is a unique force for good or ill. But the debate around... In the UK, it's been fashioned as we have no need for experts, that somehow the public is reacting against scientific knowledge, that we keep being told what to do. In America, how have you got to this situation? I realize that Donald Trump is the driving force, but the public is also almost lapping this material up in some way. I just wondered if you had any broader thoughts on why, to an extent, science has lost part of the public battle.
No, I think you're right. I think the bigger issue is that people simply declare their own truths, including scientific truths. I think science is losing its place as a source of knowledge, and it's just becoming another voice in the room. I do think that the pandemic hurt. I think pandemic hurt our trust in public health agencies like the FDA, NIH, CDC. And the reason is that when we mandated vaccines for school entry or to go to your favorite bar or restaurant or sporting event or place of worship, that was seen as government overreach in this country. And there was tremendous pushback. I think we leaned into a libertarian left hook. Number one. Number two is I think you're right. People thought, hey, the experts told me that this vaccine would stop transmission. And, it's a short incubation period mucosal infection. It will lessen but not eliminate transmission, those sorts of things. And closing schools for what people thought were too long, making young children wear masks people didn't like. And I think that this is all just a general rejection. And I think RFK Jr. is sort of representative of that, where we're okay with him stepping forward and saying, I'm going to get you the real story. I'm going to tell you the real data about vaccines so you can make the best decision for yourself or your children, because the experts aren't doing that. And I think the pandemic, more than anything else, hurt that.
How does that leave you feeling as an expert in this field?
Well, I'm on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. I would argue I'm an expert in the field. I'm the co-inventor of a vaccine. I am one of the co-editors on the definitive textbook on vaccines. But it makes me sad. The notion that anybody can be an expert, that because everyone has internet access, everybody can be an expert, isn't true. When for example, when the chickenpox vaccine was licensed and recommended in this country in 1995, I had a lot of people call me and say, I've done my research and I'm not going to get this vaccine. But what they really meant by doing their research is they meant reading other people's opinions about the vaccine on the internet. That's what they meant by research. If you really wanted to do the research on the chickenpox vaccine at the time, you should have read the 300 articles that were published on the subject, which would have meant you would have had to have an expert in virology, immunology, statistics, epidemiology, which most people don't have. Nor do most doctors have that. So we invariably look to our expert advisory committees who collectively have that expertise, collectively have read those papers, and have given us good advice. And we have gotten good advice over the last 100 years on vaccines. We live 30 years longer than we did 100 years ago, in large part because of vaccines. So where's the problem? And I think this notion that everybody can be an expert sort of feeds into the paranoia that we're being misfed information, which is what RFK Jr. capitalizes on and Donald Trump capitalizes on.
Will it just get worse and worse? Or is there a way, are you just going to shelter for 4 years and then hopefully be able to get back a degree of rationality in these discussions? Or is it just going to keep slipping away because social media, the internet, digital relationships just rocket boost people whose opinions are so controversial?
I think it'll get worse and then it'll get better. And by worse, what I mean is once you start to see vaccine rates erode, and that's happening now. We've already had a dramatic increase in measles cases over the last 4 years. We had a five-fold increase in pertussis or whooping cough cases over the last year. We've had 200 children die of influenza over the last year, which is very high. So you're already seeing an erosion in rates. And when vaccine rates erode, the disease that comes back the most fiercely, because it's the most contagious of the vaccine preventable diseases, is measles. So now you already have a few hundred cases of measles. We had an outbreak in Columbus, Ohio recently of 85 cases. Get to 1,000 cases of measles in this country, a virus that has a mortality rate of 0.1%, and you're going to start to see children die of measles again. And I think when that happens, when children once again, because it's always the most vulnerable, right, that suffer our ignorance, in this case, our children. When children start dying again of these diseases, I think then there will be a reckoning.
Paul Offit, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea.
Thank you.